We will leave our survey of the Venus rule signs and for the moment the Mars rule sign, at least as far as the ascendant is concerned for the moment, and take a look at somebody who was lunar ruled, namely Albert Einstein. Many modern astrologers have commented on the number of quintiles and biquintiles in his chart, and this is certainly an interesting issue. What I want to do is point out a few other things that are in his chart as well, so that we can see other ways that we could interpret it. Okay, so let's begin with the fact that since it is a Cancer rising chart, we have two choices for rulership. We have Jupiter as the um, almutin of the first, and we've got the moon as the sign ruler of the first. Using the moon, it's cadent. It's in the sign of Sagittarius, ruled by Jupiter, so it looks like either way we work with this, we're going to get to Jupiter. Okay, Jupiter in the ninth house. Well, okay. On the surface of it, we start to think, well, look at all those years he spent on the faculty at Princeton. And so we see this higher education theme, but then again, you look at the fact that the ruler of the ninth house is Saturn, and it's also the almutin, and then you look over at Saturn, and Saturn's in Aries. Oops. Okay, so what we have here is actually two themes that are contradictory. On the one hand, an affinity for higher education through Jupiter. On the other hand, an antagonism for education, which is Saturn. Now, both of those played out, and I think it's interesting here. If we do the kind of third house, ninth house swap that's pretty common with looking at higher education as ninth and lower education as third, the Uranus in the third house shows part of the problem. And Einstein, for the first part of his life, was considered to be a candidate for being retarded. There was retardation in his family, and he didn't learn to speak until 3. And as far as school was concerned, he was completely inept and rebellious and everything else. So, Saturn in Aries sounds a little bit like inept and rebellious as far as how it would approach things. Now, notice, there's no question, the guy was absolutely brilliant, but he wasn't fitting in. And not fitting in is a different question than the brilliance. As I've said in all of my works on essential dignities, the dignities don't give you the talent, they simply indicate how easy or how hard it is to do. Now, um, what we would have to look at um, in Einstein's case is what was he after all but a brilliant mathematician? Well, mathematics, that's real easy. Go to any of the classical lists in mathematics as Mercury. So here we have Mercury in Aries disposed by and conjoined that Saturn in Aries. And we are already started to talk about the fact that Saturn um, is in detriment. So what's going on here? Well, what is going on here is that if Einstein were your run-of-the-mill physicist, the guy who went to college, did his bachelor's degree, maybe did his master's degree at that time, PhDs weren't so necessary, and then went out and taught, um, Einstein would not have been a very happy person, I suspect. Nor would he have been especially good at it, because this is the point. The Saturn in detriment is not going to take the easy path, it's not going to take the most direct path, and it's certainly not the best situation to have for someone who is, so to speak, a conventional thinker or a conventional doer. So here, um, the Mercury Saturn with Saturn in detriment is absolutely fantastic for someone who was a rebel, who was an original thinker, who did things absolutely totally differently than anybody else. But woe betide the poor student who had this and was trying to do things conventionally. It just wouldn't work. Okay, so that's part of the thing here. Now, as far as the issue of the affinity of Einstein for higher education as he was at Princeton all those years, well, I had mentioned it with respect to religious profession. Higher education is in the ninth for a couple of reasons, and not the least because in the medieval period, The whole university system was literally under the wing of the church in Europe. So if you were part of the university system, if you were on the faculty, you literally were in orders, meaning you were part of the hierarchy, usually lower orders, but still. There's that connection, and here we have the ruler of the ninth in the 10th. It's just in the strange position and detriment. And the conjunction with Mercury really shows this is supposed to be the focus of what's going on here. Um, that that particular conjunction is certainly the biggest talking point in this chart. Part of fortune right with it, of course, doesn't hurt at all either. Now, a couple other things that we may know. The sun and moon are actually related by square. Now you notice it's 9 degrees. A lot of modern astrologers get nervous about that. But 9 degrees is well within the moiety of the sun and the moon. And the other thing we should probably look at is the Venus and Mars, which likewise are in square. However, this is out of orb, or we could simply call it whole sign for the abbreviation. What we just did very quickly is we looked at the two male-female combinations. Now, given that Einstein was heterosexual, what we just went over were the kind of default issues with regards to his attitudes about men and women, not necessarily about his marriage partner. That's more the Saturn. And here again, we see the Saturn in Aries coming up as being important. And also, we can see Mars is the Coel mutant of the 7th, so that could come to the fore too. Um, he did have two wives, and he had a number of mistresses. So, in in all honesty, probably both of those were were quite functional. So, at any rate, his attitude about women was very conventional. Namely, they were there to have children, they were there to support him, and when he wanted to have sex, he wanted to have sex with them, and he didn't feel that he had to explain anything as far as his position. Um, so, not always so easy for the women with that square. Probably didn't face him terribly much. Uh, so this gives you a pretty good idea of some of the dynamics that we see with the chart as far as how the aspect patterns come into play. Now, we use the whole sign here to look at something like the Venus-Mars being out of presenting certain problems as far as his relationships with men and women and being out of orb. The whole point here is that by itself, this Venus Mars probably wouldn't be that major a factor in the chart unless you're looking for something specifically Venus and Mars. And in terms of looking at relationships, we are looking at that, very much enhanced by the fact that Venus is ruling the 5th if you're talking about love affairs. And Mars, as we've seen as Coel mutant of the 7th, that puts either pressure on the marriage from love affairs, or it simply means that somebody who is your lover isn't going to, you're not going to find it easy to marry someone who is your lover. So that's another side of that issue. So when the issue comes up, you do look at things like the out of orb but whole sign aspect to just get an idea of the qualities that are going on